one of the things the documentary talks about is this skit called Nose Boy, where this kid has these two giant noses on his shoulders, and the noses kind of look like the image you get with Ariana Grande squeezing a potato when
Right.
she is clearly underage looks super suggestive and weird. A network should have called something on that. This is multiple productions that do involve him, which includes All That, which includes The Amanda Show, which includes Sam and Cat, which includes iCarly. If you're looking at Nickelodeon as a network for however many years it is dominant, you know, especially in the 90s where it is dominant in children's TV, you know, you've always had, just honestly in show business or entertainment, or honestly any specific vocation, you've always had the idea of child protections on set or in a work environment always being lax, right?
Right.
So, you know, this was a bigger topic. There was a huge like kerfuffle about this, not specifically with Nickelodeon, but specifically about conditions for child actors. It's always been like every decade. There's always been like a couple years where it's like, oh my god, child actors have to go through so much. Nickelodeon was like kids TV at peak, right? So
Right.
it's essentially a network where kids are making TV for kids, right? Disney Channel, you always have this slightly overarching kind of feeling of like, well, the executives are kind of in charge. Always felt that the kids were running the madhouse in Nickelodeon. At least that was how it was kind of presented. Like they really got it. So, you know, during the 90s, you have shows like All That, Kenan and Kel. I don't know if specifically Kenan and Kel was the same producer, but All That, Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, iCarly, that also bleeding into the early 2000s, that are very indicative of children's TV and which influences children's TV for decades later. And there was a producer on there named Dan Schneider, right? Dan Schneider used to be a writer on Head of the Class.
Right.
You know, was a significant writer there. And the success of that, being on Head of the Class and being an actor on there, and the success of that led him to being hired as a writer, and eventually executive producer and producer on shows for Nickelodeon. I think the chief thing is specifically when thinking about this documentary is like, it's not that the environment wasn't built to be conducive for kids or for workers. It's that every protection that was there, that was specifically supposed to be put in there, was bypassed or ignored, right? And I think you see that across, you know, like it's like we always like to say, like, especially after the documentary, like, oh my god, like Hollywood is this cesspool of like villainy and scum, which, you know, fine, but like that's everywhere, and you can see it in throughout history with like you know, whether it's meat packing industries or any place where, even recently when kids were found to be working in meat packing industries a few months ago, that child labor laws are not like especially included, and that can horribly traumatize children, especially when they're being put on camera to an audience of tens of thousands of people during their early formative years, and they're abused in a work environment, and their careers are kind of fucked with over a large period of time. So Dan Schneider is the executive producer on All That. He does really, really well, right? All That is like Saturday Night Live for kids. He builds an apparatus on that show and a cadence on that show that is very, very kid friendly. And he has stars like Kenan Thompson, Kel Mitchell, but Lori Beth Denver. There's a lot of really well-known people that come out of All That. However, on All That, there are significant, there are multiple jokes over time that start to be seen as like, oh, this is actually kind of an adult joke
Right.
put in a kid's context, right? So, like, for example, one of the things the documentary talks about is this skit called Nose Boy, where this kid has these two giant noses on his shoulders, and the noses kind of look like dicks. Like it's supposed to be a nose, you can see a nose, but they kind of look like dicks.
Right.
And you have the kid pretty much in front of like and this executive, you know, and like for this skit, and he goes like ah chew, and then a bunch of snot flies on this woman's face in the room. It's supposed to be look like a cum shot joke, right?
Yeah.
Now listen, if it's not meant to be a cum shot joke, like that, there's other jokes that are a little bit more explicit than that, but like that's pretty much towing the line. But like even if it isn't on a network like that, that needs to be checked. Like you should
Right.
that would the fact that it went through so easily is kind of absurd, you know. And that's not the only thing. There's a lot of other allegations. Like for example, there are a lot of Schneider was also said to play favorites on set. Like he would be like, "Oh, you're a great cast member. We're gonna put you into this and do that and make things happen." And then when he found another cast member he liked, he would like forget this one, and their career would be fucked. And they would. In the case of Amanda Bynes, there was a female cast member on All That who was doing really really well, and she had this show that was kind of being made around her. And then Schneider found Amanda Bynes, and now that's the Amanda show, and that's how you got that. Um, there was also allegations on set, especially in All That, of treatment towards black actors. Black and brown actors were said to have like approached Schneider with frustrations about being on set and the way that was being handled. And every time that was approached to Schneider, they were seen as like making trouble, being problematic. One specific actor, his mom was very, very uncomfortable with some of the ways he was being used in sketches. Like, for example, the first time he appears on screen, he's kind of like it's a joke, like he's like selling Girl Scout cookies, but it looks like he's like a crack dealer selling that. It's like
Right.
not appropriate for children's television. So she expressed frustration with that for like 2 seasons, and he was not brought back for the third season, largely because of his mother. Now, like all of these allegations just kind of keep piling up over Schneider over the years, right? And Schneider keeps silencing them over those years, and it's not just with children specifically. Like the entire work environment is fucked. The writers' room for the Amanda Show has 2 female writers, and they're told to share a salary, for this one writer's spot. Now, like when I heard that in the documentary, I'm like, that's kind of insane. Why would you make 2 women have to share the same salary? I checked in with the Directors Guild of America. That is actually quite normal. When writers are hired and they're starting out, they hire it as a writers team, you know. Um, so that is technically normal, but they were the only 2 female writers who were hired on, like that's what the documentary claims, in that team format. Also, they were consistently put into a pretty like fucked up environment where the one of the biggest examples is one of the main writers. She ended up becoming somebody who like is an executive producer on Modern Family and a writer on Modern Family, but she was telling Dan a story, and Dan midway through the story is like, "Hey, can you just lean, like, a story about her in high school?" And Dan tells her like, "Hey, can you lean over the chair like you're being sodomized and continue to tell me that story?" Which is a weird fucking thing to do in the middle of a writers' room meeting. You
Right.
know, I mean, like
He's an odd guy. Didn't he also say something? Wasn't there something where they wanted to have kids send in pictures of their feet or something like that? Like, wasn't that one of the skits?
I don't
Or
know.
when-
I don't know. I don't necessarily know about that. That wasn't included in the documentary. I think the other thing you have to also recognize about the doc is like the story about Dan Schneider's been building up for a while, right?
Right.
And you have egregious stuff in there already. And so the issue that comes to pass is because you live in the age of the internet where all of these things can get wrapped up and attributed to this when it's already bad as it is, right? And when misinformation gets wrapped up in there, it's hard to discern what's real and what's fake. I don't know about the feet thing for kids. I do know that there were skits on like there was a show he had called Sam and Cat with Ariana Grande. And there's like these online episodes that he would put up of like just extra things. And there's one thing where Ariana Grande is like, uh, have you ever had to try to get a juice from a potato? Right? Which is an absurd joke that you would see on a Nickelodeon kind of thing. Like, here's something that doesn't really make sense, but it's absurd. But the image you get with Ariana Grande squeezing a potato when
Right.
she is clearly underage looks super fucking suggestive and weird,
Right.
right? And like, again, like the nefariousness of this is that all of it can be explained away by this is just absurdist kid humor, right? Which some of it is, but a lot of it, when it's put on a network, especially in the early 2000s and late 90s, like a network should have called something on that.
Well,
It
I
should,
mean,
especially, yeah.
is it being brought to his attention that, hey, that seemed inappropriate, or is he just
The,
got such clout that nobody even suggests bring it to his attention, or that
so
he just
we're
fluffs it off?
jumping ahead here a little bit, but
Oh,
like
sorry.
Schneider, no, no, it's all good, it's all good. Schneider does respond to that, and he does say like, "Hey, nobody brought this to my attention. There was a bunch of people on set. Why wasn't it brought to my attention?" In his apology, that's not true. Like the documentary multiple times makes clear that parents, that other people in charge, did bring it to Schneider's attention, and every time it was brought to his attention, Schneider was not great to work with at the time. He was incredibly aggressive. He was incredibly like my way or the highway. Fuck off if you don't like it.
Right.
Um, like for example, in the writers' room, there was examples of like Schneider would, uh, you know, like send emails or text messages over AIM, which I guess was a workplace thing at the time, and send shit like hey, yell out like this random phrase in the office, just to prank people. And sometimes it was like things like he would say, "I'll give you $40 if he." I told one writer, "I'll give you like $300 if you eat this whole thing of ice cream," right? And she's like, "Oh, I'll do that. Like, I'll eat this like 2 pint of ice cream in like 30 minutes." And then later on, he did again. He asked again for like another prank similar to that. He's like, "I'll give you $100 if you do this." And she's like, "Oh, can I add that to my tab?" And he took her aside and he gave her this whole dressing down of like, "Don't you ever talk like that to me. Don't say that I'm not good at my bets. Don't." So he's like a little bit of a sensitive, like asshole-ish producer type, right?
Right.
You know, and like again, yeah, like that's what I'm trying to say is like this was brought up to him multiple times, and the chain of command that should be in place to make sure these kids are okay, to make sure this environment is safe to work in, to make sure that nobody is getting abused, was not enforced in a way that was conducive to everybody being okay. Now, this is also not every single Nickelodeon show. This is also not every single Dan Schneider show. But this is multiple productions that do involve him, which includes All That, which includes The Amanda Show, which includes Sam and Cat, which includes iCarly, right? That being said, both Drake and Josh, had decent experiences with Dan Schneider. Drake, which I'll get into in a little bit, is one of the biggest subjects of the documentary because of the abuse that he endured. This is going up on YouTube, right? I'm like I have to talk very carefully about it just so you guys don't get demonetized and everything like
Yeah,
that for
yeah.
the
This is YouTube.
yeah. So like even me haven't talked. So there's allegations that Drake Bell suffered as well under another actor on set called Brian Peck, right? Um, Drake was obviously the star of Drake and Josh. He was also on the Amanda Show, right? Drake is this kid who is found and he makes his debut on the Amanda Show as well as Josh Peck, right? And so at the time, on all that and on the Amanda Show a little bit, there's a guy named Brian Peck, right? Who's a dialogue coach. He's been in the industry for quite a while. You can find videos of him with Leonardo DiCaprio, kind of helping him with stuff, and them all being chummy. He's a Growing Pains, I think. Super well known, like talent in the industry.
Right.
And so he plays Pickle Guy on All That, which is a guy who just eats a bunch of pickles and shit. So, pretty much Brian Peck is really, really friendly with Drake. And Drake's dad is kind of his manager at the time. And he's like, "Hey, why don't you guys come over? I will," which is always the best for a son. What is it? Why don't you guys come over? I will chat with, like, we'll work on acting and everything like that, which is a little bit of an innocuous thing. Like, hey, actor, help an actor. I'll do some dialogue work with Drake and make him like a better actor. So uh, Drake's dad takes Drake over, right? They have a pretty good first session. All is well. Drake ends up, what is it? They go back, they have a few sessions. And then over time, Drake's dad starts to notice that, man, Brian is like really like getting close to Drake, like hanging around a little, it's weird, right?
Right.
It's a little bit weird. And so he notes it to some of the other parents. The parents are like, he's normal. And like it should be noted that like Peck is like a big thing to remember through this story is that Peck, like again, when we're talking about like the Hollywood like secrecy, like adrenochrome, like that's no, like this is somebody who the thing that makes nefarious people very nefarious is that they are charming, they are really really like chill with everybody else, and the people they abuse like are hidden well. So like when crazy stuff like this happens, you have to understand that they are intelligent con men who are doing this. So he had a large amount of the cast fooled. He was very friendly with everybody. He was very friendly with industry executives. A lot of them are seen as like, oh, he's a normal gay guy who's just having some stuff, right? So essentially, Peck starts hanging around Drake a little bit more. Uh, uh, Drake's dad is like, dude, like it's a lot, and he tells parents, and parents are like, well, Brian's normal, right? Well, Brian's fine, and so I'll also note a story later that happened during this time, but essentially, as that goes on, Peck like then notices it and then starts to try to separate Drake from his dad. So during dialogue sessions, and Drake's dad stays away from set because he's like, okay, I'm deemed to be like a problem or whatever. Like I'm messing up the vibe of the set. Peck goes up to Drake and starts putting in his ear like, hey, your dad's trying to steal your money. He's not doing this. He's preventing you from opportunities. There are all these issues happening, and all of a sudden, through that kind of like worm in your ear, Drake's relationship with his dad starts to erode little by little by little by little, right? Drake's dad and his mom were divorced at the time, and at one point, Drake is staying over with his mom, and his mom calls his dad and is like, hey, Drake doesn't want you to be his manager anymore. Drake's dad is upset, but it's like, if that's what he wants, that's what he wants, right? And Peck essentially takes over that role, right? Because Drake's mom is in Orange County, and Drake's mom doesn't want to drive him up to Nickelodeon to do all this stuff. But while Drake's career is exploding, him and Josh have a really good like kind of rapport with each other, and they're set up to possibly do a spinoff because Dan really likes them on that. Um, and so Brian Peck is like, hey, you know what? If your mom's not going to drive you, I'll drive you up to LA. You can come, you can stay over here, we can work on dialogue together, and then, you can go do your networking, whatever else you have to do, right? And at this point, Drake's dad is not in the picture for that managerial portion of it. Well, when Drake starts to stay over at Brian Peck's house, within the first night, some stuff happens, and Drake is like, like he wakes up and some stuff is happening. He's like, what the fuck is going on? And he's like, oh my God, I'm sorry, da da da. And then it happens over and over and over again for months on end for a long fucking time with this kid being abused, right? And the most, like, if you read the court transcripts, the documentary doesn't have him say it out loud because it's pretty horrific. There's some horrific shit that happens, like horrific, which
And
I
he's not.
can't
He
describe.
doesn't tell anybody, or the
How are you
guy.
going to tell somebody? You're a 14-year-old kid. You have no way to drive. Keep in mind, it's also the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, if anybody says they are abused, the contrition is you want attention, right? Like Harvey Weinstein's abusers didn't just start in 2016. There was a long period of time where people had said stuff, right? Like, and you know, uh, it's not great. Like he didn't say anything because again he's 14. He doesn't want all. Keep in mind also Brian Peck is a beloved person amongst everyone,
I mean,
right?
he's his manager too. So he's what
Yeah,
he's thinking it might hurt his career. He doesn't want to say anything. Is he?
you exactly get it. He's manager. He's locked into so many significant compromises if he fucks up this relationship. Also, how's he going to get to LA? His mom doesn't want to drive him. This is like it's a textbook case of a minor in a situation, a Hollywood minor in a situation they do not want to be in, with someone in a position of somewhat power who exerts way more influence than they should and ends up hurting and damaging this person in a way that is insane and unwarranted. And so it's a perfect storm of that. And this guy built it. You have to understand, like, Peck built that whole situation up by separating Drake from his dad, by doing all of this stuff, right? And there are over time it just got worse and worse and worse. And finally, Drake is over at his ex girlfriend's house, well, his girlfriend at the time's house, and um, Peck keeps calling the phone of his girlfriend's mom, and like Drake is like, I don't want to talk to her, talk to him, and he's like, he just keeps calling, like, hey, we were supposed to go to Disneyland, blah blah blah, and essentially, Drake's girlfriend's mom at the time is like, hey, can I talk to you? And he's like, why is this man calling you so much? And Drake is like, he's just mad about something. He's like, no, somebody doesn't call a 14-year-old boy this much incessantly at
Right.
his girlfriend's house. So Drake tells her. Drake tells his mom. I think they set up something, and Peck is he confronts Peck over the phone on a recorded line. It is immediate how much it comes to light, right? Like Peck just confesses pretty much on
Right.
there. And then that starts the dominoes of like, oh, this kid was abused. And again, the lawsuit that stems from that, this documentary is the first documentary that made it apparent that Drake Bell was the one who suffered under all of that stuff. It was essentially a kid who was unnamed who was suffering over all of that. And the other side of it is like, oh, like during the documentary, which is we'll get back to Schneider, is like, well, they asked like who was the most helpful during this time, and Schneider was actually quite helpful to Bell during this time. Right, he was there. He was supportive of him. He was there for him. He did everything he could to try to help him out. Now
Right.
that doesn't excuse all of Schneider's other problems, right? But that's kind of what I'm trying to say is that
Well,
this is a
he's
new.
helpful with another abuser. He's not helpful with himself. I mean, he gets to act like the hero, like, I can't believe he would do that. I can't believe that's which paints him in a very good light.
But I don't want to. That's true, but I do think that there's and the documentary. I think one thing that is successful about the documentary is it does paint nuance here, and in the sense that like you can have a person who does feel insane sympathy towards Drake Bell and feels absolutely like this is horrific, while at the same time ignoring his own abuses because they're not to this extent, right? If I can give you an example that's not necessarily for the documentary, like for example, my father's an alcoholic, and growing up, I was like, oh my god, you see these images of an alcoholic on TV, they're beating their wives and they're horrible and da, da, da. And every time when I would bring up like this is an abusive situation, it would be like, well, it's not like that. They're not throwing broken beer bottles at me. They're just driving in the car with a bottle of wine under their front seat. That's not insane, but it is insane. And you have to understand that like the biggest criticism this documentary makes is about power structures and the fact that Schneider is in a position of power. He does head of the class. He builds up all that. There are plenty of people who have experiences with Schneider at Nickelodeon that are incredible. He made their career. He was super helpful to them. But there are equally as many people, if not more, who had horrendous experiences with him, who were abused. And it's important to remember that because it means that anybody is a target of this. Even you, everybody can be a target of bad behavior. And if you are not aware of it, if you have like a friend who's just like, oh, he's cool with me, and somebody else says, like, dude, like, he beat me up in a parking lot because I said not, like, just weird shit, you need to at least entertain the idea that that could be possible to hold them accountable for it. Now, it doesn't mean 100% it happened, but it does mean that you have to entertain the idea. And the thing is, multiple people gave the opportunity for them to entertain the idea that, hey, maybe Dan is not altogether there when it comes to being a good boss and somebody conducive of a work environment that is appropriate for children and for other people working in this environment. And even when that was brought up, it was silenced. It was shuffled under the rug. Oh, there being a problem. Part of that is Nickelodeon. Part of that is also the environment in the early 2000s and the way we treated allegations of workplace misconduct. There was a huge issue with that for a long time, which came to light in the Me Too movement. Um, but this is something that does happen. So I think Schneider is being honest because Drake Bell still holds that, even in interviews that he did after the documentary dropped, that hey, Schneider was very, very helpful to him, but he can't speak to other things that happened with other people. That is probably true. Um, and I think that's important. Also, a big part of it is that when Drake Bell does go to the lawsuit with with Pac Ver and the accuser there, he's the accuser with Pac Ver. There are like 40 to 50 actors on Peck's side who have written letters to the judge attesting for Peck's character, which obviously is fucking devastating to an abuse victim who's like, hey, I'm saying I'm being abused. And there are all these famous actors in the industry, including Will Friedle, including, Alan Thicke, right? Including, I think it was Matt Lawrence, but like a bunch of actors who are super well known, supporting Peck. And James Marsden, um, and like the biggest conversation that's going on right now around that is that like, well, were the actors aware of how horrific what was going on to Bell was? Were they in denial of it? Were they just trying to protect Peck from any problems? There is discrepancy on a few of those. A few of those actors are catching a lot of backlash. Specifically, James Marsden is catching a lot of backlash. Will Friedle, who was the voice of Terry McGinnis in Batman Beyond, and also the brother on Boy Meets World, has said that he too was in a way abused or manipulated by Peck. Peck kind of said to a lot of people like, "Oh, there was just a guy who I was really into, and he's underage." And again, in the early 2000s, there was a lot of those kind of like weird media things going on. There were like a lot of movies made about like, oh, well, you're like seven, like. So he portrayed it in this like innocent situation when it was a horrific abusive situation. Either way, it's not okay, right?
Right.
Because either way, it's a grooming situation. But there's a lot of discrepancy going on, like specifically in the internet and chatter about that. Although a lot of people are disgusted. But yeah, I mean, like a lot of this is the power structure that is in there was not conducive to helping kids. Also, in the aftermath of this, like FYI, just to keep on the Dan Schneider thing and to go back to it, Schneider's sets there were two other instances of kids being abused and getting into that position, right? Which to be fair, Schneider did not immediately know about. Schneider didn't know, like nobody, like it was found out through the police and everything like that, but the environment was created so that there wasn't enough checks and balances for those kids to be protected from this kind of behavior, right? And as time went on, Schneider became more and more controlling, more and more abusive. More and more people started to step out and be like, "Hey, Schneider, you're being kind of an asshole," right? The Sam and Cat thing was later on in his Nickelodeon career. Eventually, Nickelodeon fires Schneider after I think somebody files a complaint during the Me Too movement. They fire Schneider after an investigation. Schneider makes it out like, "Oh, well, I'm going off to do other big things." No, you wouldn't be dismissed as the golden boy, right? And then for years after, people start to re-examine some of the skits and some of the things there, and realize that there are more and more issues that have come out over time of his abusive behavior. Now, there's an apology he released online, which I'm sorry, I'm giving you like a giant monologue essentially.
No, it's great. It's
Yeah,
trust me, I'm more than happy to sit here and just go, "Right, uh-huh, yeah."
yeah, yeah.
This is the easiest this is why I love this job. It's the easiest job in the world. I just have to sit here and listen to the story, you know what I'm saying? Just
What? No,
yeah,
okay.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
And,
um,
it's funny, I mean, there were times I wanted to break in, but you are on a roll. Like, I was thinking about the, Ashton Kutcher and, his wife, going to, is it Danny Masterson's sentencing where they wrote a letter for him, he's such a good person, he's such a good and people So it's like you're a victim of this guy, and you've got these big time actors saying, no, he's a good person. Do you remember that? And there was a
I
huge.
absolutely remember that, and it's something I covered too on my show. And I think like, dude, it's such a weird thing because like 100%, like it's not a good. There's so many places in society where we just fail people, right? And absolutely, you have every right to be like, man, why the fuck are you protecting Danny Masterson, right? But I think the way you heal that situation, again, maybe that's just like my male brain thinking of like, oh well, you can empathize, but how do you fix this so it doesn't happen again, right? Um, like, and I say that because people, you're supposed to empathize first, right? I'm being an idiot about it. So, but I'm trying to say like the way you fix this situation is you have to understand that this is a deeper systemic problem that people are caught up in. These are all pawns in a systemic problem. The predator in the situation, Danny Masterson, should never have been put into the positions he was put into, right? Okay, but predators are con men. They are very good at weaving themselves into situations where people feel uncomfortable and scared and you don't know, right? That doesn't mean you should be like terrified all the time, but you should be aware that if somebody brings to you a concern, you should at least look into the concern even a little bit, even if it seems absurd. Just look into it, right? And if you do the due diligence and you find something there, hey, that's fucked up. I will say also in the Kutcher and Kuna situation, I think it's a little bit different from Peck, um, because the difference is Kutcher and Kunis knew Peck, no, knew Masterson was what had done horrific things, right? Possibly, right, and was found guilty of them. They were trying to get a more lenient like thing about custody with his daughter specifically, right? Because he had a daughter at the time, and they didn't want to fracture that relationship, which I think is a little bit different from like trying to like if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But that's what I remember about that story specifically, right? Um, which I think is a little bit different from these people trying to say that actually let Peck off for what he did
Oh,
to yeah,
okay.
yeah. I
They're trying
think
to mitigate the situation.
yeah, both of them are them trying to mitigate a sentence. I think when somebody writes, I think whenever somebody is found guilty of a crime, right? Like, if it's, especially when you're in the public eye that much, right? Like, let's say we're being cynical and saying that celebrities are all vain assholes who, like, always want to protect their own brand, right? From any specific PR standpoint, you're going to protect your brand. You're not going to write a letter, right? You'd
Right.
be specific and selfish and assholish. If you view celebrities as flawed people who are put in a crazy position, who can be vain and assholish, but are just genuinely just normal people who are also scared as fuck, like all of us, right? It makes more sense somebody trying to write a letter to, because this is all I know of this relationship. I want to try to help them. Still not great because this person abused all of these people, right? But then you start to get to the heart of why this kind of abuse perpetuates so much is because we only see the people we know as the people we know, not the other kinds of people they can be, right? And I think that even people like you're passing by, we're not all perfect human beings. We've done things that are bad. And I think a big part about existing in the society that we exist in 2024 is understanding that you have to look at your past actions with a more critical lens because we were living in a society that didn't take that shit seriously. And when you make adjustments to that in order to make sure that the people around you and the people that you are working with or who are working for you are protected, then you get to a place where that kind of behavior is called out immediately. Those kind of people aren't hurt. Those kind of letters aren't written. But that doesn't happen until you can assess and diagnose the problem, which is the fact that we are all very biased in our interpretation of what abuse is. And we have to be better at calling it out. And so when you're talking about somebody like Schneider or Peck or the two people that were found out, right? There are multiple like I said, multiple checks. For example, Peck invited a bunch of kids and their parents over to his house for dinner one time because like they were cast. And one of the cast members remembers being in Peck's house and going to this one weird room where he had this picture of a clown and they looked on the back and it was like a self-portrait of John Wayne Gacy, which John Wayne Gacy had sent to Peck as a personal pen pal or friend, and that's fucking weird, man. Like you don't
Odd.
like post a
That's an odd pen pal to have,
very odd pen pal to have.
especially since there was like, was there 25 or 26 bodies found under John Wayne Gacy's house of
Yeah,
boys, young boys,
yeah. But do you remember,
not just anybody, young boys.
bro? There's that, and then like, but again, like when watching this thing, I really want to make it clear. Like, I'm not trying to absolve Hollywood; they are absolutely guilty in this regard. But like, just in terms of pop culture in general, do you remember by any chance when like it was years after the Manson family murders, right? But around like the early 2000s, the late 90s, there was this weird like fascination with like gothic people like Charles Manson, where they were like, oh, it's kind of cool and kitschy to have like to talk about Charles Manson and how crazy he was, like because he wasn't a dreg of society. And like that's like I think like this guy's like fucking thought process, but that's not normal, man. Like it's not normal to normalize a person who found 27 dead bodies under his house. Like it's fucking weird. And
It's like
every
people wearing Che Guevara shirts.
well, I mean like I yeah,
He's, I mean, no offense, if you really look into it, he murdered, tons of people. He was a vicious human being,
but
you
I mean,
know.
there's tons of different like I mean you're good, but I think there's tons of different people in history or just in general where they're idolized years after, whether positively or negatively, right? Who like there are signs where you're like, okay, there's a lot more complexity to this, right? And I think specifically with the John Wayne Gacy situation and Brian Peck, when the person when this cast member comes up and sees the drawing, everybody in the room is like, okay, well, like that's kind of wild, but this guy's decent, so like that's it's just probably crazy. He's just probably this is an ironic thing
That
to do,
one
right?
little thing. Everybody's got one little thing.
That's the problem. Is like not everything is the red flag, but you should be like that's kind of weird. It's okay to clock that as kind of weird.
Yeah.
You know, you doesn't you can still think Peck is like, oh, you're cool, man, but you're kind of weird, right? Not shake it away, because that little patina of something, right? When you start to notice his behavior around Drake and other people, that metastasizes, and you can very easily at least confront him about it. I'm just surprised that there was no confrontation in any way, shape, or form with some of these abusers, except for like the parents, like Drake's dad, which should have been caught, And then also there's a lot of backlash towards Drake's mom because Drake's mom sent him on those rides, right, to Peck's house. I do think that parents in that situation, I don't think that his mom is not included in the documentary. She doesn't show her face. I don't think that she's happy with what happened. I think she probably blames herself. I think she feels horrific about it. You know, um, like as as somebody else with a YouTube show, I always try to look at the nuance of something because that's the best way you diagnose the problem, right? Instead of like panicking over it or shoving it away. And you know, yeah, I've said it a few times already. It's power structures. I should also say that Schneider issued an apology. That's what I was talking about before, where he has a cast member from iCarly come on and like talk to him for like 20 minutes about all the allegations of the documentary. And it starts out seemingly like, oh, he's going to admit to things and say sorry. But it's so fucking scripted. And like, it's just like, hi, I was a cast member on iCarly. Dan, we're going to talk today. Dan, what you did in the writer's room was not cool. And he's like, yeah, it was horrible. Da, da, da. Yeah, I'm so disappointed in you, Dan. Oh, boy, like so actory.
Scripted.
Like it feels scripted, right? It feels like a puff piece where he has to admit a little bit, and then they push back. There's even a point where he goes like, "Oh, now I'm gonna push back on this." Like, "Oh, look at me, I'm doing my due diligence." But it gives very much that. Do you remember when Woody Allen? Well, there was this piece about Woody Allen it was a few years back where it was about Sun Yi and about Woody Allen's like relationship with her, and it was published in a pretty big paper, and it's supposed to be this like, let's look into this and see if it's really as bad as people say it is, and then within like 2 paragraphs, like the author gives away that he's like friends with Woody Allen, and I'm like, well then why the fuck are you the one doing the piece?
Right.
You're not going to be critical. You need somebody critical to do this investment or to confront Schneider. Because honestly, if Schneider was confronted by somebody if Schneider gave the exact same answers and he was confronted by somebody very critical of him and was like, yo, like you no, but you've done all of these kind of things, right? And even if he stuck to his guns, I would respect that. I would have problems with it, but I would respect that at least a little bit more than him getting his friend over with a 3 fucking camera setup, because he had to get a 3 camera setup and had to hire an editor for his fucking apology video. Like, that seems absurd to me. And also, like, there's other allegations where he just completely shifts the blame when talking about his jokes that were inappropriate. He says like, oh well, if they were around now, cut it. If somebody's not happy with the jokes, well, multiple people weren't happy with the jokes. You're not being accused of being nose blind or like, oh, I just didn't know this was happening. You're being accused of being not knowing this is happening, being told it's happening, and then denying that it happened, right? If you are not, that's why he looks like he knows what's going on. I believe that Schneider was a little bit with tunnel vision in unknowing of how fucking abusive he was in a bubble. He was in his own bubble, like I control everything, blah blah blah, right? And that is a dangerous place to be in because you can abuse a lot of people. I believe that. What I don't agree with, and I think is fucked up, is that when somebody is peering into his bubble and being like, hey man, look at all the shit you're doing, he was like, no, close it up, close it up, close it up. I just want to live here. You know? That's the problem. And until he can admit that, that's an issue. And I think that there are so many people with allegations against him that he has to take some accountability. I will say this also. In the week since the documentary has dropped, there have been some notes from people who were involved in it who feel a little bit uneasy. Mark Summers, for example, one of the hosts who was in the first part of one episode, he hosted Double Dare and stuff like that. He was talking a little bit about Nickelodeon. Wasn't happy that he was included in this documentary because he didn't know what it was about. Yes, he didn't know what it was about. They just called him in to do an interview, and they ambushed him with a clip of Schneider's kind of weird shit on air. Yeah. And he was like, what the fuck is going on here, right? He asked to be removed from the documentary. He left. They used his footage anyway, and so he's now pretty upset. That broke a couple days ago. But even with that, right, like there is just a substantial amount of evidence and things that have come out over time that don't look well for Schneider in general, right? Like let's if we take the documentary at his word, he's clearly not okay with the stuff Peck did and that kind of abuse, but he does not create an environment that treats kids in a way where they can grow up. He doesn't put kids who he works with in a safe environment where they can grow up and feel like fully formed adults or okay, right? You have to go through therapy after a Dan Schneider, like, if some people will have to go through therapy after a Dan Schneider show. And the fact that, like, you're never, like, if you're a boss and stuff like that, you're never going to be able to, like, help, like, you do your best to help everybody. That's clearly not his best at making sure safety is the number one priority. If that was the number one priority, I'm sure the shows would still have been dope. There's no reason you got to have people abused in order to get that entertainment, right? We have plenty of shows that have come out since with people who have had amazing, like, you listen to anybody from Parks and Rec, or any of those are sets where everybody fucking is having a blast. There's no issues on those sets, right? And whatever issues there are resolved, and the cast stays in touch and everybody like that, right? The fact that those can exist and your sets exist and your sets are abusive, there's a problem there, And it's not
Right.
it's not the creative material.
Well, I was gonna say, what was the deal with? Wasn't there like the voice coach guy, the guy I forget you said his name.
Brian Peck.
Yeah, I mean he was found guilty of um
Yeah.
wasn't he found guilty, and didn't he like he left and then didn't he go to like Disney or something?
Yeah, he got hired. He got hired soon after. You know,
I mean,
again, like this is one of
doing
the. It's one of those things where like you have to understand. Like again, like you know, it's one of those things where you. And I say this because, like the big idea is that oh, Hollywood will hire like any predator for any reason. Okay, let's say you take that out. Let's say okay, we're
seems
making sure we're being
appropriate.
yeah, absolutely inappropriate. We're doing due diligence on every predator that comes in here, and we're taking them out, right? Well, the reason Peck was hired probably because he was friends with somebody.
Right.
That's why, right? And so now you're looking at okay, well, where you're being due diligence on predators, but people who are friends and nepotistic can get in, and that's another way a predator can get in, right? You have to close the doors on the mechanisms these people use to manipulate other people. You're not looking for only flaws in the system. You're looking in flaws in the system that people perpetrate, right?
Right.
So yeah, he was hired on the Sweet Life of Zach and Cody very soon after, which was absolutely fucked. Absolutely fucked. And again, this is at a time when people were not taking allegations seriously. There are still people who pine for that time, who are like, why are all of these people coming out of the woodworks and talking about this? I will say there is we do have a culture which is very much so like living off of like, hey, let me get the tea on somebody and what horrible thing they've done. They're all waiting for something, right? That is terrifying, and that is a problem because things can get conflated. That being said, at least we believe people like Drake Bell now, because in 2000s the reason he didn't come out is because who would have believed him? Even if he's a major star, do you know what those headlines would be? Those headlines would have been like, "Oh, Drake Bell accusing somebody. He just wants attention. He wants to just up his career." And because actors did do that, there were people who came out and who said things happened to them, and they were said to have been trying to juice their career. What is it? Courtney Love, who has her own set of problems, right? Said at one point, like she made a joke about how Harvey Weinstein was not somebody you wanted to fuck with and wanted to be around because he's a fucking terrible person and he's abused so many people. He made a joke on a red carpet about it. And people explain it away because they are mad at her about Kurt Cobain and a lot of problems that she's had, rightfully so. But she was correct in that instance because dozens of women came out afterwards and it was like, Harvey Weinstein is a terrible fucking monster and has destroyed this industry and metastasized a problem that needs to go away that's going to take multiple years. We're still dealing with it. You know? So, again, not to defend Hollywood, these are structures that need to be examined. And this exists everywhere. If Hollywood needs to change, everywhere needs to change. Your job, my job, like everywhere. We all have to be aware. I'm sure you have a staff. I have a staff. We are no, but you work with other people,
I
right?
work alone. I
Yeah,
have
you work.
Colby. I have Colby, but Colby
Right, right. But
we're
you have you guys both work together, right? And in that relationship, there needs to be mutual respect and things and boundaries put into place. I have an
Colby has no
editor.
respect for me. Colby has no respect for me. So I don't know
I
what you're
I think I
saying.
think you need to
You
report that to
clearly have
proper
never
authority.
watched the show.
Well, you know what? I'm glad to know about it now. So no, but I'm saying like I have editors, right? Who like I have editors I work with. I've been in positions where I have to hire people and stuff like that. Um, and every single time you have to put in boundaries in place to where even for me, like I know I have like flaws. I don't want to overstep those boundaries and make those people feel like shit because they won't say anything because they want the fucking job, right?
Right.
So, Schneider should have done that. And Schneider should have been really aware of the people he was putting into contact with one another. Especially when
Right.
you're on a Nickelodeon show and you're one of the fucking biggest. With great power comes great responsibility. Fucking Spider-Man
Yeah.
made that even more popular in 2003. You couldn't fucking look up from your bullshit for like 10 seconds and make sure that was happening.
I love how all your references are from like the early 2000s, and to you that seems like a long way away, like that's way back in the 2000s.
I mean, it's 20 years at this point, dude, bro. Like it's 20. It's been 20 years. My early 2000s. First off, I am in my 30s, so like that was when I was like a teenager and stuff like that. So, you
I
know,
was born in 1969.
my fr- how are you still like? Are you an ent? Are you like one of those things from Lord of the Rings, like who you've seen
Oh,
all of
54
creation?
years old. And you're like, it was so bad in the 2000s. I'm like, 2000s. What about the 80s and 90s, bro? Like,
I'm not gonna lie, 80s and 90s weren't great either. But I think
let's
that the reason I say that is because like a lot of people, it, like the rosy memory of an era is always like 10 to 20 years after it's there, and then people are like, "But was it? But was it?" Like everyone's like, I remember growing up, everyone's like, "Oh man, I miss the 90s. I miss." 90s were like the best. 90s, like there were no problems, there were nothing, and then like 5 years later, like, hey, do you remember the LA riots? Like, did you forget that happened? Did you forget coats of Obama? Did you forget the Gulf War? Like, we tend to forget like major things that happened that were big things that slipped through our minds.
right. Yeah. I was just thinking, listen, I remember they didn't have seat belts, bro. I remember driving
Oh
down
my
the street.
god.
You could ride in the back of a pickup truck. My dad had a Lincoln, and the behind the back seat, there must have been whatever 2.5 feet on the back where the window went down at an
Dude.
angle, and you could lay down back there. So I would lay down back there, and my dad would,
Oh
I
my
would, a little
god.
kid, 5 years old, climb up there and lay across it and fall asleep. And my dad would hit the brakes, and I'd fly forward and fall in the back
Bro.
seat. And he would laugh and laugh. Alcoholic with the cigarette,
Oh my god,
used
yeah.
to blow the smoke in my face and make me cough. I mean, things that now people would be like, my God, take that child away from him. Where to me, it was, it's, my
Well, I
dad,
mean,
when I was 16, wrecked his car, came and got my car and said, like, wait for the tow truck, have him take my car. And I was like, yes, sir, yes, sir. Took my car and wrecked my car. He wrecked both our cars in the same day.
that sounds like, well, again, I had also an alcoholic dad. That sounds par for the course, where they're like, all like, listen, I'm responsible. This is a mistake. I'm responsible. Watch me fuck up again.
Right.
And you have to be like, oh, that's just two. It's a coincidence, right?
Yeah.
And then like, I had a friend in high school. He got this great. He got like a Mustang, like an old like '60s Mustang, right? Beautiful car, no seat belts. Looked like a fucking like a just just a giant shard of metal on the road, right? So couple months in, him and a friend of mine don't show up to school. They got in a car crash, uh, and it fucked them up. It was horrible because there's no seatbelts, there's no things, and those old cars will liquefy you
Yeah,
in a
there's no
car
crumple
crash,
zone. There's no crumple
dude.
zone.
Yeah, so like, bro, he was in the hospital. The girl with him was okay, but she lost her like equilibrium. She couldn't like walk straight for a little bit because her ear, like, it was fucking bad. And yeah, man, like there's no doubt that there's like that there are insane decisions that and things are much. I mean, like you're not gonna. Yeah, seatbelts are definitely one thing. There's also airbags. There's also other collision things that are better
Mhm.
now,
Yeah. You got a
than
much
they
better
were in
chance
the
of
like
survive
'70s.
you have a much better chance of surviving an accident now than you did in the
Oh my
'70s.
god. Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm not. I remember getting a new car and being afraid of like every like okay, is it safe and everything like that. And they now have like crashed. You can watch the crash, and like pretty much every new car is like this is fairly safe, But it's within like 1 or 2% safety of each other versus like a 1979 or 1960s Mustang, which
Don't
you'll
get
turn
into a
into
crash.
air as soon as you get it. Yeah, but no, man, that's the Nickelodeon insanity and the world that they lived in.
And you cover this on your channel.
Yeah, I mean, I covered this. I do a show called Freestyle the News where like I wrap the news every week and then I do a breakdown and everything like that. And then I have another show where I break down certain subjects. And this was something that like I remember me and my girlfriend watching the documentary and being like, just this is fucking crazy. And then like the next day, Dan Schneider issued a response, and it was so like absurd to me. I was just like, I gotta fucking talk about how ridiculous this is, you know. Um, and I don't like to make videos about that, like, because I don't like to monetize videos that are about that stuff just to make it cheap. I would like to add something to the conversation in a way that makes sense, in a way that's conducive and that helps people. And the thing that I wanted to add was like, this is a power structure problem because I worry about this shit happening. I do worry about this shit happening everywhere. In addition to Dan Schneider abusive kids, there was also abuse of his staff. His staff was very, very upset. They were put in environments they weren't great at. I've worked in an abusive environment before in a really shitty space where, the bosses are asleep at the wheel and other people in that environment abuse other people. And that is not okay. Like, I hate that shit. That shit needs to be deaded, like 100%. And a lot of times those people offload us like, oh, it's not as bad as here, it's not as bad as here. No, it is as bad as that. It is, you're doing the action that is directly harming your coworkers in a way that makes work here terrible, that makes their lives terrible, and the money is not worth it, and the drive is not worth it. So, I felt like that was important to point out, especially in this situation where it can very easily be shuffled away into like, oh, Hollywood is crazy. Sure, Hollywood has a lot of problems and is also very crazy. Also, the place you work at is probably also very crazy and needs to do better. Everybody needs to do better. So,
Where are you? Where are you located?
I'm in California. I'm in North Hollywood, which isn't
Okay.
Hollywood. Hollywood is like West Hollywood. Like when you talk about like Hollywood and like the glitz and glamour, that's like Sunset Boulevard, Culver City, like all of that. I live in like Van Nuys, like NoHo area, which is like a lot of food trucks, and a lot of like family owned shops and everything like that. But yeah, that's what I'm originally from Orange County, so that Drake Bell stuff hit me hard because I was just like, oh man, I know people who in Orange County would drive up, and I went to school with a kid who was on all that while Schneider was fucking in charge, you know, and like I haven't hit him up about it because he's probably going through a lot right now. So
Okay. Yeah, I was in LA about 2 weeks ago.
oh right,
Yeah,
where are you located?
Tampa, Florida.
Oh man, well next time you're in LA, hit me up. We'll grab lunch or something.
Yeah, yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Well, this was interesting.
yeah.
So, do you only do the YouTube? You have YouTube and Instagram.
I have YouTube, I have Instagram, I have TikTok. You can follow me on YouTube at Zaid Tabani, ZaidTabani, or just search Freestyle the News. Um, on all platforms, it's ZT Music, ZaidT Music. Um, and I also do music for video games every so often. So if you play Mortal Kombat and you finish the game, you're like, oh, who's that? That's me. I'm the one rapping at the end of there. So
All right. Okay. Yeah, I'll mention it at the end. Mention it. That we'll put the links in the description.
oh, for sure. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. So
Okay. Anything else? What do you think?
no.
You did go an hour, by the way. You're
Oh,
56, 57, 58,
there we
59.
go.
1 hour.
Yeah. Well, no, man. I'm appreciative for you having me on. I just hope people hope I did all right, and I hope people just take away from this, um, just to examine their surroundings and everything like that. I think there needs to just be a lot more self reflection in the world. So hopefully, this helps people self reflect, and hopefully they'll buy cars with seatbelts that won't liquefy them in crashes. I hope that's
Yeah.
also another thing that they take away from this.
Yeah, those were good times. Listen, that car was massive. Massive. You could probably put five bodies in the trunk.
Was it an
And
SUV?
no, he had it was like a Lincoln Town Car or something. They
Oh
don't even
God.
these things were huge. Huge. Um I remember one time my sister tied our dog, we had a wiener dog, to the bumper of the car, like she was walking him, and then she
What
tied it.
childhood did you live? What is this like,
And my dad got in the car, backed out, and drove down the street dragging the car,
bro?
dragging the dog. Drove him
Bro,
about 2 blocks, but a neighbor jumped in his car and chased him down and stopped him. The dog was all skinned up and fucked. I mean, listen, it had tiny little legs. It could barely walk to begin with. You know what a wiener
yeah.
dog looks like.
Oh,
So you can
exactly.
imagine that thing. It didn't make it 10 feet before it was just dragging, you
Oh
know.
my god, did it live?
It lived. I
Oh
mean,
my
it takes a while to
god.
get through the hair. It only went 2 blocks. He's fine.
Oh, poor
Um,
dog, man. Nah, man, don't drag a dog in a car. This is weird.
but listen, there was a movie called Vacation with Chevy
Oh
Chase where he
yeah.
drags the dog to where there's nothing left but the leash.
Oh god.
So it wasn't that bad. But there were some good
I
times
just
in that
I just want
car.
I
It was
just
all
want to say
fun.
if you're comparing what happened to your dog to what happened in a movie with Chevy Chase where he's dragged, like, I don't think that's
Fact.
a great that's a great place to start.
Oh, good times with my dad.
Yeah, man. But
I remember
it
I
is,
left you remember Big Wheels?
yeah.
I left my big wheel out in the yard one day and someone stole it. And I came back. I was like, Dad, someone stole my big wheel. And he goes, huh, teach you a lesson. Just walked off. I was like,
my
well,
dad
can I
my
get
dad
another big wheel? No. He's like, if you can find your old one, maybe you can get it back. I don't know. What do you want me to tell you? Taught
my
you a good
dad
lesson.
my dad had a lot of my dad had a lot of proclivities like that where he would do things that he would never be like, oh, that's gonna teach you a lesson. He would kind of puff out his chest and be like, oh, I'm gonna get it back, and then he would never get it back. But like, he would always try to do like extra. So he would do wild shit, like, you know, like, there was a point where he drove on the wrong side of the road. That was fucking crazy and scary, right? But then there's also times where he would just, like, on my birthday one day, just freaking, like, he's taking me to school, and then he's like, I forgot something back at home, drives me back home, and it's like, all like, hey, we're actually skipping school today, and we're just kind of hanging out and everything like that, which is good. The parents can have vices and be tough, but they love you, so it's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Good times.
Could have skipped some of it, but
No,
yeah.
no. First off, both of us could have skipped some of
Yeah.
that. I think we're both on the same page there.
Yeah. You know what Circus World is?
Like circus, and like,
No, like Circus World. There was a place called Circus World, which was in Orlando, kind of close to Disney. Remember, my dad got drunk one time.
Did you grow up in Florida?
Yeah. So,
Speaking of this, not to interrupt. Speaking of Nick,
okay.
I wanted to go to Florida so bad when I was watching Nick as a kid, because, like, I know the studios were in Orlando, and I was like, oh my, I gotta go to Orlando. Never went to Florida. Never went to Orlando. But like, that was like I felt like that was like the Emerald City from freaking Wizard of Oz or something like that. But continue, sorry.
No, I was just thinking that's funny because that's very much like that's what I felt like when, like I said, my dad was drunk, threw me in the car one day, said, we're going to go to Circus World. And we drove to Circus World, but he was drunk. So, but after an hour long drive, he starts to sober up. So we get a motel across from Circus World. So I'm sitting at the window, and as I remember talking about, I'm like 7 years old. I can see the big Ferris wheels and the rides. So you can sit there and stare at it. I stare at it all night, go to sleep, wake up the next morning, ready to go. He's sobered up now. Realizes I just took this kid. His mother's going nuts.
Oh,
throws me in the car and says,
no.
we'll go next week. We never went.
No, dude.
Bro, as a 7-year-old,
Did your dad drive slow? Like, did your dad, when he was drunk, drive slow on the freeway?
No, he drove. He'd weave in and out of the,
oh, bro,
the lanes.
Bro,
And
my father drove so fucking slow, and I never knew why. I was like, you're just an old man, probably, right? And like, I remember getting a driving instructor, and the driving instructor, like, teaching me how to drive. My dad was like, no, that's too close. You have to drive, and I had just left like 15 car lengths in front of me when I was like 20 or something, like, driving, and eventually, when he had gone to rehab and I had to talk with him, I was like, "Why do you drive so fucking slow?" He's like, "Because usually on the road I was drunk, so I just didn't want to like hit anybody, so I would leave
Right.
so much space." And I'm like, I mean, that's conscientious of you, but also terrible in so many ways. Like,
You're a conscientious drunk.
you're a conscientious awful person. Like
Right.
you're
Oh,
not much of a saving grace there. You know, like he used to go to like he would try to, when he was really depressed, he would drive to work, not go to work, go to the liquor store. He took like 7 or 8 shots of those little like cheap drinks, and then he
right.
would get on the freeway and drive back like 45 minutes home. That's insane to me. That's insane to me. Like I had no idea how bad it was until like later on in life. Like I ended up having to take him to rehab, and they were like, "This is bad. Like this is really bad." I'm like, "No, it's not." I'm like, "No, it's 11 out of 10, my guy. It's bad. Like you need to understand that." And I was like, "Oh, okay, all right." You know, and that's when I was like, "Okay, this is like horrible, and I have to re-examine a lot of shit." You know.
Did he sober up?
No, he died from it
Oh, really?
last year. Yeah.
I mean, from alcohol, like what, like a was it cirrhosis of the liver or something, or
No, you mean like he had a fatty liver. He died of a heart attack, but like everything in his system kind of said it was like the alcohol that led
yeah,
to it,
yeah.
you know? Because
Well,
like
alcohol overall, it's just bad for your
it's
whole
fucking
system.
horrible. And like, and the thing is that like, here's the thing that was scary about that specific addiction. When you have other addictions that people can get drugs anyway, but like when you have like, if my dad had a cocaine addiction, right? There's still that barrier of like, this is illegal. You have to find this person. You have to go through. Alcohol is available everywhere, and there
Yeah,
are advertisements for it, and there's everything. And the please drink responsibly doesn't hit an alcoholic's ear the same way.
yeah,
And because all of the examples on television, my dad grew up born 1949. His example of what an alcoholic is a guy who like hiccups all the time and all that kind of shit. Which eventually he did start having hiccups where he couldn't breathe for half a second and shit. But like before that, he would be like, "That's what a drunk looks like." But a drunk is just somebody who his eye droops a little lower. You know, there are other signs that you can see that a drunk has, and so it was very hard for him to reconcile that he was like this and this was painful. Eventually, like I had to cut off contact with him for a long time, and you know, the last time I talked to him before I cut off contact was he had threatened me, right? And he moved to Vegas with a cousin of mine, who I'm not a fucking fan of. He was an asshole, enabled a lot of shit. Um, but like he just was blitzed out of his mind. He got 3 DUIs within a month, which is a fucking felony,
yeah.
right?
You have I'm surprised he didn't end up in prison for that.
He's very close to ending up in prison. He had to go to the judge, ask for forgiveness. He's a 69-year-old man. And so, you know, he ended up being okay, but like, you know, he would go through periods where he'd have to go. There was, when he died, we found out the story where he had gone to a rehab, right? And they had a break in the rehab. On the break, he went to go buy drinks and came back to the rehab drunk to the point they were like, he can't come back here. Like,
Right.
that's insane to me. And so eventually, you know, like he had, yeah, like he would just like, when we cleared out his room, there was just, it was bad. And like, yeah, he drank himself to death, unfortunately. You know, and that's the thing also, like, you know, you're talking about your dad, like, you know, like driving to Circus World and maybe slamming the back of the car. I think what makes specifically, you know, especially why I approach things with nuance is because my dad was like two different people. He was abusive and he did some shit that was really fucked up. But he was also very kind at times and very, very outgoing to be like, hey, he taught me a lot of good things. He also taught me a lot of bad things. If they were like, even being critical of it, like, it's hard to reconcile, you know, hey, the reason I can talk to you and do music and all that kind of stuff is because of my dad. And the reason I have all this fucked up shit that prevented me from doing it a little bit is also because of my dad.
Right.
And having to deal with that is the biggest issue, I think, of having like an alcoholic father like that. Because if it was all bad, fucking easy to be like, yo, fuck this person, I know my direction in life. The fact that it was sometimes genuinely very, very kind and very, very helpful and genuinely very, very scary and very, very detrimental to my life experience and dangerous, that makes it very, very tough to reconcile what in your life is a positive lesson and what in your life is a negative lesson. And it takes a lot of time to unpack all of that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that my father, when he was sober, was an amazing individual.
Yeah.
You know, but when he was drunk, and he was a binge drinker. He would go on a 2-week bender. You know what I'm saying? He would,
Oh
or it'd
God.
be a month, and then he'd sober up for 3 months. Sometimes it'd be 2 years. You know,
Yeah.
he'd go to rehab. They'd take him out, and and what's so funny is he worked for State Farm Insurance,
Oh shit.
and he was such a good insurance manager, and he made so much money that they would put him through the rehabs. I mean, they'd put him through a 30-day one, then a 60-day one, a
Yeah.
90-day one. I mean, they're
And they're
like,
expensive. Those rehabs are expensive. Some
yeah,
rehabs are
he lives
pretty,
there. They live
bro.
there. You know what I'm saying? Like and
Yeah.
he didn't go to a shitty one. It's State Farm Insurance. It's a nice place.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're super expensive.
Bro, I think what's interesting to me too is like that's a hard lesson to learn, especially as a kid when you grow up with that, is that you can't you're not in charge of your parent.
Yeah,
So learning that is like the most difficult thing because you got to tell yourself like also like you don't have a father like a traditional father figure, right? Especially
right.
growing up, you're saying you're born 1959 or where when you born
69. Yeah,
69
yeah,
1969. You've grown up through media seeing like traditional father figures on television, all these kind of things. Even me, I saw traditional father figures on television, and you don't have that in your life. You have this weird amalgamation of two different people who are not necessarily fitting that mold. And especially with rehab, like it's one of those things where they'll take money from a patient and not do it because it's a lot of it is up to the patient to like actually make the change. Like you can't force somebody to not drink. And also like in my case, I had, my father's family, old Pakistani family. Some of his sisters were very like, you know, one of his sisters was a big enabler who was just like, oh, it's just not a big like they don't want embarrassment. Like, we would tell his family like, yo, he has a problem, and then they'd be like, oh, we'll take it seriously. And then a month later, they were like, oh, Salim's family is being a problem, you know, because they don't want to have any embarrassment come to their family, you know. And
yeah,
like we're on decent terms, like whatever terms now with those guys, but like it's one of those things where if you're an alcoholic, everything in the world is geared against you to just getting better. Like it's actively trying to push you towards some problems and everything like that. And I mean, like I will say, I have a pretty decent like I'm very wary of the relationships I form with any not only like substances but like food with like activities and everything like that because I'm like, oh man, if I go overboard, I don't want to be, you know that's a little bit of a problem too because I got to be like more like relax a little bit sometimes.
mhm,
um but yeah, man, it is not an easy thing to go through rehab, and it's not a system that's set up very well to actually get people the help they need, especially when every other billboard they drive is like a Dos Equis billboard, or there's a liquor store in the corner, or something else can
right.
happen, and you know the like bartenders will cut you off, but people who own liquor stores will be like, I'll give you an extra. So
Yeah, good times. Good times. All right.
hey man, it was decent talking to you. I had a good time, man. Thank you so much for having me on.
Hey, I appreciate you guys watching. If you like the video, do me a favor, hit the subscribe, hit the bell so you get notified of videos like this. Please share the video. And also, Zed's links are going to be in the description box. So please click on those and check out his channel. Thank you very much for watching. See ya.